I'm not sure if everybody in here realises what you're involved in. I've been all over Scotland from Fort William to Annan. Last night I was in Campbellton to another PAC meeting. I was in Clydebank with the Margot Mobile in the morning and the same at Kirkintiller this afternoon. You are part and you are engaged in the biggest civic movement and self-education movement this country has ever seen. Meetings like this are taking place all over Scotland. The media isn't picking it up, it's below their radar. There's an enormous amount of energy being put into the Yes campaign, particularly by what I, at my age, call the young generation, the sort of 19 to 45. That'll please some folk. And that energy doesn't stop on the 18th when we get a yes vote. There's a whole young generation have discovered themselves and have discovered their ability. And I've been telling them all over the place, don't you go home at 1 minute past 10 on the 18th. You have a great deal to do from the 19th onward. And you've got many ideas on how we can turn this society of ours around. Now, I'm a grandpa. Margot and I had 10 grandchildren. And when they started in S1, the senior secondary, I wrote each and every one of them a grandpa letter on the basis that they're more likely to take advice from me than their mother and father. That's and I've sat down with each one of them individually. Now, I've been someone who has monitored the United Kingdom economy for a long time. Philip has mentioned the 25 billion cuts coming next May. Why is there 25 billion cuts? Now, they keep telling us we're too wee and we're too poor. The reality is the United Kingdom is in a financial fix. Its national debt is £1.3 trillion, heading for £1.5 trillion by 2017. The Chancellor of the Exchequer this year has got to borrow £100 billion because he's spending more than he's taking in. And I've had to tell my grandchildren that if we vote no and we remain part of the United Kingdom, and after voting no, the Scottish people are finished. For 20 years, we have been at the top of the political agenda. If we vote no, we'll relegate ourselves. Down in Westminster, they'll say, we called their bluff, the game's over, we don't need to bother with them again. And if we complain, they'll tell us, you had your chance, and just knuckle down to the fact that you voted to remain in the United Kingdom. That's going to be the fate. So I've had to tell my grandchildren to get the best level of skill they possibly can get. Those who can get to university, get the best academic qualifications you can get in order to go to Canada, Australia and New Zealand and repeat what's happened to our generations in the past as we export a high proportion of our young. So I'm campaigning for my grandchildren, but I'm campaigning for yours and your children as well, because I am outraged at the situation among some of our children. We've got 250,000 children living in poverty inside Scotland. Now, actually, I'll be okay economically in or out of the United Kingdom. And there'll be folk in Troon and elsewhere who are feeling things are okay. We've been meeting no voters sometime, telling us, I'm voting no because I'm okay. And so they are. But I'm challenging everybody to rake their conscience. They're okay, but what about their ways? In 1973, in the Scottish Grand Committee down in the House of Commons, when I was an MP, we debated a document called Born to Fail. What happens to children's education if they live in a family where poverty rules? And it came to the conclusion, of course, they've no chance at all. Well, this is 2014, and we've got 250,000 children born to fail. We should be ashamed of that. I even showed you that we are the 14th richest country in the world. How is it we've got food banks? About a month ago, the Glasgow Evening Times reported what Julie Webster in the Maryhill Food Banks told them. A woman and her two wains came on a Tuesday and they had had nothing to eat since the Friday. And so hungry were they were looking for cans with a ring pull so that with their fingers they would actually be able to get into that can of beans. We should be ashamed that that's happening in our country. It's utterly disgraceful. So one of the reasons I'm campaigning is to remove the scourge of poverty from our children. Somebody said to me last week, have you ever thought, Jim, that there might be a child in one of those deprived areas who in his head is capable of producing a cure for cancer, but he'll never get the opportunity of doing so? We can change that situation. Now, there's two things I want to talk to you about. One is currency, after the debate last week. Now, I don't agree with Alec on a currency union. I don't want the Bank of England to have anything to do with the Scottish budget. But Alex Salmon is technically quite right, and this has to be understood. A currency union is very much in the favour of the folk south of the border. The reason is that for generations they have imported more than they've exported. They have a huge balance of trade deficit. If Scotland becomes independent and there's no currency union, everything that we export is taken out of their balance of trade and they're in a worse position than they are at the present time. Now, I don't agree with it, but there's no question about it being viable and stable. And the only conclusion I can reach is that they're saying that out of spite if we vote yes. And that's not a rational position for them to take. But let's assume that's the case. The use of sterling then comes into play. Now, the jargon of the economists is that sterling is an international tradable currency. What that means is anybody in the world can use sterling. If somebody's coming from Japan as a tourist to the UK, what do they buy? They buy sterling. If we go to Spain, what do we take? We take euros. Nobody can stop anybody using US dollars, using euros, using yen, or using sterling. It's not just inside the British Isles. Now, we could use sterling for a period of 2 years, maintain stability. And during that time, we build our own central bank and build our own currency and peg it 1-to-1 with sterling, and we've maintained the tradable stability. The thing about the Scottish currency is that it wouldn't be a weak currency because we export vastly more than we import. And when you export more than you import, you bring in massive foreign currency reserves. So there is an alternative if they're stupid enough to cut their own economic throat. The next thing I want to talk to you about is the thing that makes Scottish audiences a wee bit uncomfortable: oil. Out there is the Firth of Clyde, and we all ken that in Ayrshire. Underneath those waters are large deposits of oil and gas. You didn't ken that. Davy Lambie and I were MPs away back in the 70s, and we had picked up rumours about it, but in those days we had no research facility and there was no freedom of information. So we got blanked by the government when we asked about that. Chick Brodie, who's an MSP for the southern part of Scotland, about a month ago delved into the National Archives, and he's got files about that length. What he found was all the scientific evidence of the oil and gas deposits in the Firth of Clyde. But then he unearthed an incredible letter. Actually, it's no incredible, it's bound to have been the case. A guy called Roger Mansell, whom you and I have never heard of, and he was never elected by anyone. But he was a senior official in the Ministry of Defence. And he wrote to the Department of Energy on the 17th of September 1981, forbidding any development of the oil and gas in the Firth of Clyde. And he actually said, under no circumstances can any rigs be built and placed there. Because at that time it was Polaris, now it's Trident, and it could not sail safely through the waters of the Firth of Clyde if the place is full of oil rigs. So we were kept ignorant of that potential. Now mark the year 1981. That's the year Margaret Thatcher's government started destroying Scotland's industrial base and creating mass unemployment. So there we have this irony. Onshore we're being destroyed, offshore there's a new potential and we can't get it because we know nothing about it. Well, I'm out in the Margo Mobile, and one of the songs we're playing is the Proclaimers' Cap in Hand. And it asks, why should someone else rule our land? Well, out there is a new industry. You're talking about no building the one odd warship at Govan Shipyard. You're talking about building oil rigs. You're talking about building supply vessels. You're talking about onshore and offshore high quality engineering. You're talking about Prestwick Airport becoming the helicopter pad for that new industry. These are high quality jobs, high paying jobs. And when we vote yes and we get rid of Trident and it sails for the last time, that oil and gas belongs to us. And if we've got the brains we were born with, we'll create a Scottish National Oil Corporation. We'll no franchise it to BP or anybody else. It'll be ours. Not just the taxation, but the black stuff itself. I also want to ask you to think of this. There's 21 billion barrels of oil left in the North Sea, discounting what they're starting to discover west of Shetland and in the Firth of Clyde. That's a huge amount. For 5 million people, that's more important than it is for a UK of 60 million people. I'll give you an analogy. I am hoping to win the lottery tomorrow night. Now it's £2 million. So suppose I've got the winning ticket and you're all in a syndicate and you share the winners with me. So I've got $1 million and all you folk have $1 million. But my million for me, the individual, is worth a damn sight more than your share of $1 million in a syndicate this size. And that's exactly the position it is with oil. And I'll give you an example of what we can do with the actual black stuff itself. One of the things that Margo, I'm quoting from Margo, is that self-respect brings self-confidence, and that brings imagination and innovation. Think of what we can do with some imagination with part of that black stuff. 40 million tons of oil come from the North Sea, through Scotland every year. All we use for our cars and our lorries and our trains for petrol and diesel is only 10,241 tonnes a year. That's 0.02% of the total oil. So suppose we decide that we'll take 0.05% of that black stuff, and we cut dramatically the cost of petrol and diesel and jet fuel. We'll transform our tourist industry, because most of the tourists that come up from the south don't go beyond the Glasgow-Edinburgh line because of the costs of fuel as you go up into the Highlands. Cut that and you open up even more of the tourist industry there. Think of the difference it would make. I was in Campbelltown last night, and a farmer got up and said one of his problems is access to markets and the cost of getting from Campbelltown to the main markets here and south of the border. Cut his fuel costs and you start to transform his farming business. And if we cut jet fuel, what Ivan said about our connections with the rest of the world from Glasgow and Edinburgh airports begins to make sense. And if you cut jet fuel, Prestwick Airport can become the area where people come to train their pilots. All of that can come with one single tiny policy. That is our oil and we're taking a tiny proportion of it. Now, Philip has mentioned the NHS. And don't be kidded that we are wholly immune from privatisation, because the thin end of the wedge was put in by Gordon Brown, incidentally, under the PFI system for building hospitals. I live in Edinburgh now, and the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary, before a single nurse is paid or a single aspirin bought, they've got to pay the PFI people £56 million a year. And that's the thin end of the wedge. If we vote no, and we are no worth the damn inside the United Kingdom any longer. What I would like you to consider was the audacity of the man who set up the National Health Service. One of my great socialist heroes is an Iron Bevan. And up here we tend to think the National Health Service has always been here. That wasn't the case when I was born in 1937. And when an Iron Bevan set about setting up the health service, it was opposed by the economists, it was opposed by the political establishment that was the Labour, and it was opposed by lots of royal colleges in the medical profession. But what an Iron Bevan told generations was that the greatest weapon in the armoury of a socialist is audacity. The audacity to think the way the establishment tells you you can't think. And the audacity to do what the establishment tells you you must not do. And the establishment is telling you you must not vote yes. Now I want to end with a quote from two very different women. The first quote underlines the negative attitude that we are supposed to accept for ourselves. Too small, too poor, and totally inadequate if we started to run our own country. And the quote comes from Joanne Lamont on Scottish television on the 25th of February. We are not genetically programmed to make political decisions in Scotland. Now, not only are we too wee and too poor, we're too thick as well. Now, contrast that with a quotation from Margaret MacDonald. This is our time of reckoning. We've got to take it, and if we don't take it, We are consigning our children to much less than we've had, to narrow horizons, lower aspirations. We are consigning our children to being small when we should be giving them a much bigger and better world inside their own country. That's the decision we've got to make between the Joanne Lamont view of you and everybody else and the Margot MacDonald one. There's only one answer to that: yes.